Hello again. As you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy. Today's class is Introduction to Windows Workgroups. So we're going to talk about creating a little Windows Workgroup network. Now this is in this server track, so you may be thinking, Eli, why are we learning about workgroups? I want to learn about servers. This is a server track. Well, remember, as we talked about before in one of the first introductory classes to this track, is technically a server is any computer on the network that provides services to another computer. So if you have a folder that is shared on your computer and somebody accesses it, your computer is now a server. If you have a printer that is plugged into the back of your computer and your buddy is able to print to it from his computer, then that is a print server. So although you're just sitting there, you're typing on the computer and using Word or Adobe or Mozilla Firefox, that is still a server of sorts. It's not one of the big fancy enterprise class servers, but in the computer world, that is still a server. Now, workgroups are a much maligned thing in the technology world because, geeks, us, we always want to work with the bigger, better, faster, fancier equipment. So if our client comes to us or if our boss comes to us and says they want a server, what we want to do instinctually, we just say, great. We get onto Dell's website or IBM's website or HP's website. We spec out this massive $5,000 server with Windows 2008 Server Data Center Edition, RAID, and all this kind of garbage. And we give that to our bosses as the proposal. So they come to us and they say they need a little database server, a little web server, or a file server, and they get back this $5,000 proposal because that's a server. Well, that doesn't do a lot of service for anybody, because if all your client or your boss needs is a little file server, you can provide them a little file server within a workgroup architecture for $500 or $800 or $1,000 installed versus $5,000 for this monstrosity of a server that they are never, ever in their lives ever going to come close to hitting the capacity of. Why this is important is, again, to computer professionals, to technologists, we look at the world and we want to play with our toys. And that's something that managers always laugh at when I'm a computer guy and I'm doing stuff, is I talk about the toys because this stuff is fun. Technology is toys to us. We get to play at work. Well, managers, business people, all they care about are solutions and the price for those solutions. So if they come to you and they say they have $5,000 to spend on this project, and then you give them a $5,000 server, well, they'll be happy enough. The next time you want to do something, you may or may not get the approval to do it. But here is where you can make yourself a friend of management, and then in return, management will become a friend of you. If they come to you and they say they need a file server, and they're willing to spend $5,000 for it, you can either give them a $5,000 server, and what happens. But if they don't really need a $5,000 server, if you can come back to them and you can say, for $600 or $800, I can have a server installed for you that will do everything you genuinely want it to do. It provides the solution, not a bit less. It provides a solution for $800. They are going to be overjoyed. They're going to be happy. They're going to be excited. And they are going to love you. But why this is important is because the next time they come to you and they have a project and they say, this project we have budgeted $5,000 for. Well, you may look at that project. It might be a voice over IP system or surveillance system or something a little more high tech. And you go, hey, Bob, you're not going to be able to get this for $5,000. Even if we could install this for $5,000, it's not going to do what you want. This will not serve $5,000. You're not going to buy a system that provides you the solution that you want. Well, if we took the first scenario, when the client asked for a file server and you spent the $5,000, at this point they're going to go, they're not going to know whether to trust you or not, and the project may go forward, it may not go forward, or they may even force you to buy some $5,000 piece of crap system because all they want to spend is $5,000. Well, here's the thing. If before they'd asked for a file server or a simple server, you had installed this $800 system, it had worked magnificently because that's all they needed. Well, when they put this project in front of you, and they said that the budget is only $5,000, you can look at them and say, hey, Bob, I would love to do this for you, but you cannot have this solution installed for $5,000. It can't be done. It's going to cost you $8,000. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. And they're going to look at you and they're going to be suspicious, like, what do you mean it's going to cost you $8,000? I'm willing to spend $5,000. But here's the thing. You can look at them straight in the eye. You can say, you remember when you came to me last time and you were willing to spend $5,000 on the project and you only spent $800? They're going to say, yeah. You go, well, I told you before that all you needed to spend on this project was $800. You didn't have to spend $5,000. This project that you now have given me, you need to spend $8,000. You have to come up with that additional $3,000. That's just the way it is. I've been an honest broker with you. Before I saved you money, now you're going to need to spend more money. And a business manager, a businessman will appreciate that, and the chances are you will get that extra $3,000. You'll get the full however much you need for the project, and everybody will be happier. So that's how things like work groups and how selling products, either again to your clients or to your boss in the real world, can really affect the resources that you get in the future. So again, work groups, if you have a huge network, if you have 100 computers and you have lots of security policies and all of that, no, don't do a work group. But if you have a 5 or 10 person office, you need to share a few files, you need to share a printer or two, work groups can do absolutely everything that you need. And even if you do buy a little dedicated computer, you can go out and buy that crappy little $300 e-machine and everybody will be happy with the solution. So that's the introduction to this. That's why work groups can be very important. Again, a lot of technicians overlook them. They don't want to install them because they're not fancy and complicated and expensive. But you don't always need fancy, complicated, and expensive solutions. So give me a second and we'll dive into Windows Workgroups. So let's take a moment to simply define what a workgroup is to make sure we're all on the same page. So a workgroup is a number of computers that are connected together on the LAN, so the internal network, that are logically grouped. So to diagram this out, imagine we have a switch right here, and you have computers that are connected to the switch. However many computers you want to have connected to the switch. So this is the LAN, the local area network. Now, let's say for whatever reason you want to group computers into different work groups. You want them logically separated. So you have some other computers over here. So let's say you have work group 1 and you have work group 2. So inside the network properties of your computer, whether you have XP or 7 or Vista, etc., you can set what work group your computer belongs to. So let's say these computers over here are connected to work group 1 and these computers over here are connected to work group 2. Now what happens when you go into your network management console, it used to be called Network Neighborhood, then it was called My Network Places. Microsoft keeps changing the name of this thing, so I'm not exactly sure what it's called right now, but again, it used to be Network Neighborhood, then it was My Network Places, now it's something else, gobbledygook. Well, when you go into that to look at the local networks, you will now see, instead of seeing all these computers, you'll see work group 1 and see work group 2. Now, if you double click on the icon for work group 1, you will then see the computer names for these computers. If you double click on the icon for work group 2, you will then see the names for these computers. So it's a logical way to divide up computers on the network so that if you need to navigate through and find a particular computer, it makes life a lot easier. Now with work groups, again, something that you have to remember is that each individual computer on the network is responsible for its own security and file sharing permissions. As we talked about in one of the other classes, if you have a domain and a domain controller, that single domain controller is responsible for all security and all permissions across the network. So you have one computer that you sit down at, and you can change the permissions for different people on the network at that one computer. If you have a work group, every single computer has its own security scheme. So if you need to edit security network-wide, it means you basically have to sit down in each and every single computer and change the configurations on each and every single computer. This is why work groups are good for small environments, because if you have 5 or 10 computers, every once in a while you can sit down and take half an hour or an hour and change the security configurations. If you have 100 or 200 or 500 computers, imagine actually having to sit down at each and every one of those. That's why you would want a domain controller, so you have a single computer to go to, when you need to change any security things. So this is what a work group is. On top of this, in the Windows world, so if you have a Mac computer or a Linux computer, or way back when, if you were dealing with Windows 95, 98, or 2000, work groups were a lot easier back then. All the work group was that logical configuration. So you just put in the network properties, what work group you're in, and then really all that did was logically put you into a different place on the network. Now, when the Windows environment, so if you have Windows XP, if you're dealing with Windows 7 or Windows Vista, putting computers into a work group not only puts them into a logical concept, but it also changes things like security, file sharing permissions, the firewall itself. So that's the one thing to remember about the new Windows world, is when you put a computer into a work group, it doesn't just change logically, what the network looks like. It actually changes things like file sharing permissions, network discovery protocol, all of those types of things. So that is a Windows specific thing with work groups. So this again was just an overview of the work groups. Now let's get into talking about really why to use work groups and how to use them in the real world. So when most clients or most bosses want their employees to be able to share files, the main reason they want them to be able to share files is to share things like access to QuickBooks. Or if you have a construction company, to have one central repository of where you can store invoices or project plans and all that stuff. So although with a work group environment, you can have every single computer on the work group be able to share files and folders unto itself. Usually that's not the best idea, because you get this, you get something that technically works but is logically a complete and utter mess. Sarah saves her documents here, Sam saves his documents here, Bob saves his documents here, and then nobody really knows where any documents is. So when I set up work group environments with file sharing for my clients, I did not allow them, or I did not set up for every individual computer on that work group to share their files. Because one, you get a logical mess of everybody's just sharing crap all over the place. And that's a nightmare. That is a nightmare. And then also, as we talked about before, every single computer in a work group environment is responsible for its own security permissions. So if all of these different computers in that work group are sharing files and folders out, then if somebody quits or is fired or is demoted or promoted or any of that, it means you have to sit down in each and every one of those single computers and change the security and file sharing on those computers. Again, it's just annoying and tedious. So what I did is I came up with like a faux server environment. So you have the normal work group. Everybody joins the work group. They all go into work group 1 or MS Home or whatever. But then I would create a standalone computer on the network to become the file and print server. So I would have one computer on the work group network. This single computer would house all of the shared files, the shared printers, etc. So basically, this became a poor man's server. So as we talked about before, if you buy a real server, if you buy a Windows 2008 server, it is going to cost you $2,000 at least. Beyond that, if the thing needs to get repaired, the hardware parts are going to be more expensive. You're going to have to have somebody that knows how to administer servers, maintain servers, fix servers. Because that's one thing nobody ever talks about, is Managing a server isn't that big a deal. Installing a server isn't that big a deal. Fixing a server when something has gone horribly wrong, you need somebody that really, 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 really understands servers. And especially for small organizations, for small companies, that can be difficult to find. There are not very many very good server troubleshooters just out on the open market that you're going to be able to afford. And servers, again, like real servers, Windows 2008 server, Windows 2003 server, when something just goes batty, nutty, nobody knows why it started happening. I mean, those can be very difficult to repair. Well, in this environment, I would just use a Windows 7 Business Edition computer, or a Windows Vista Business Edition computer, or Windows XP Professional Business Edition computer. Use that as the server and have all the shared files and printers on this single computer. Makes life easier. You have the shared files, it's inexpensive, and again, with the security permissions, you go back to only having one computer to deal with. So you can share out a folder on this computer to this person, share a different computer folder out to this person, to a different person, to this person, and then if you need to change that, you just go back to the single computer and just change whatever permissions that you want to do. So in the real world, this is what I suggest you do if you create a work group. So you create a work group, like we talked about, we put all the computers into Workgroup 1 or MS Home or whatever you want to call it. And then you create one computer on the network, and this becomes the server. It's still just Windows 7 Business Edition or Windows Vista Business Edition or Windows XP Pro Professional. But it's one computer on the network that will now house all the shared files and folders, printers, etc. This is a very inexpensive configuration. This is very easy to maintain, manage, etc. And again, like I said, if a client or boss comes to you, they're willing to spend $5,000, and you tell them you can give them a solution for $1,000, they're going to either call you back or promote you or do lots and lots of good things for you. So if you can create a solution that works, that's not nearly as expensive as they think it's going to be, that's good for everybody. So again, I would suggest with a workgroup environment, you create that one computer and just share everything out of that one computer. So this is the part of the program where we were about to go into a demonstration, and I was going to show you how to create a work group in the Windows world. That was the plan. You see, the problem is as time has gone by, Microsoft keeps changing how to create a work group and the different tools you use to create a work group. So way back in the day with Windows 95 and Windows 98, which I wasn't going to show you, Windows NT, all you had to do is you had to go right-click on My Computer, you just changed what work group the computer was in. There was a little blank spot, and you just said, this is the new work group, or this is the new domain. You said, okay, and you restarted the computer. And that put you into a new work group, and that's all you needed to do. Well, then Windows XP came along, and they came out with, it was called the Network Setup Wizard, because they put in additional security features when you join a work group. So this is where it would open firewall connections, and it would open or turn on file and print sharing, so that you could share files and all that on the network. Well, then Windows Vista came along, and they came up with some other mess. And then now Windows 7 is out, and they've come up with this whole home group thing, and it's an even bigger mess. So I can't show you, or it's not worth any of our time for me to sit here and actually try to demonstrate how to get these different types of operating systems to work together. Realize, since you're students now, you're supposed to be playing with this stuff. So you can combine all these different types of computers into a single work group, and you can get them to talk to each other. But realize, it is different for Windows 7, and it is different for Vista, and it's different for XP. And you might have to do some Google searching if you have multiple different types of computers on the network to get them to talk to each other, especially if you have the Mac computer and a Linux. It all can be done relatively easily, but if I tried to sit here and show you every possible configuration and demonstrate it on my computer, we'd be here all day, and you just don't want to do that. So we are going to go over the basic theory, what you have to understand that should work in order to make a work group work. So, what do these network setup wizards do? What does home group do? Etc. So the first thing, before you set up a work group, the first thing that you have to do is update all the computers that are on the network that are going to become part of this work group. So whether they're Windows XP, whether they're Windows Vista, whether they're Windows 7, even if they're Mac OS X, you need to get all of the updates up to date. Because again, Microsoft, they never sell you a completed product. They always put out all of these updates that you need. And so some of the security updates are required for a Windows XP computer to talk to a Windows 7 computer. There are updates that are required for Windows Vista to talk to 7, to talk to XP. So the first thing you do, unless you want to lose your mind, because the easiest way to lose your mind is to try to set up a work group without updating all the computers. So what you should do is the very, very, very first thing is update all the computers that are going to be part of the work group to make sure they have all these little security patches and updates and that they'll actually talk to each other. Because there really were, like with Vista and XP, there were problems with them talking over the network, and XP had to get this update, and it was just a pain. So update all the computers that are going to be part of the work group. Now, once you've updated them, when you add all the computers to the work group, basically you'll go in and you need to come up with one name for the work group. The default for Windows used to be MS Home. I don't know what it is anymore. But you have to come up with a name for whatever the work group is going to be. So you might say Office. Let's say the work group is Office. Office. So when you go to each and every computer to add it to the work group, whether you're using Network Setup Wizard or whatever you're using, you would then say the work group that you want all these computers to be in is Office. And so that will logically combine them into a work group called Office. The next thing that needs to be turned on is something called File and Print Sharing. File and Print Sharing is an actual service on your Windows computer. If this service is not turned on, then your work group's not going to work. You're not going to be able to share files and folders. So you have to make sure that File and Print Sharing is turned on. That's what's going to happen. The next thing is your firewall. You have to make sure the File and Print Sharing ports on your firewall are open. If you go into just the Windows firewall, this is pretty easy to check and make sure that they are open. This can be a really big problem with Windows systems because, again, Windows is a little quirky, it's a little buggy. Sometimes things like opening the ports to the firewall just aren't done in these wizards, these configuration wizards. I don't know why. So if you're having problems sharing files on the network, first make sure they're in the right work group, then make sure File and Print Sharing is on. And then what I would suggest you do is disable whatever firewall you have. So if it's Windows Firewall, just for a few minutes, disable it. Make sure that's not causing the problems. Also, if you have McAfee Firewall or Norton Firewall or any of those, completely and utterly disable them until you can verify whether or not they are the problem. Again, Norton is just notoriously horrible for blocking stuff it's not supposed to block. So a lot of times people will not be able to get to shared files and folders simply because Norton Internet Security Suite has blocked their ability. If you disable the firewall entirely and you get access to the files and folders that you weren't able to get to before, then you know it's a firewall problem, and then you can go in and play with the configurations. If you disable the firewall entirely and you still can't get to the files and folders, then you know that there's a bigger issue going on. The last thing, and this was true for Vista and now with Windows 7, is something called NDP, or Network Discovery Protocol. Oh, this was a fun one to deal with Vista before any of us knew what the hell NDP was. Network Discovery Protocol is the actual protocol that is used to show computers that your computer is on the network. If this is not running on your Windows Vista or Windows 7 computer, then no computer on the network will simply be able to see your computer at all. Because this Network Discovery Protocol, it discovers stuff that's on the network. So if that is disabled or if that is not turned on for some reason, then nobody will be able to see your computer, and you also will not be able to see other computers on the network. That's what this thing does, and that's all it does. Again, this came out with Windows Vista and it's continued on Windows 7, so that could be a problem too. Again, as I said, I'm not going to demonstrate how to do this with XP and 7 and Vista and all that because that would just take too long. But the concept, what you need to try to do is you need to come up with a name for your work group. You need to add all the computers in the work group to that name after you've updated all the computers. I said that before, but make sure you update every single computer that you want to be part of the network. You don't want to be banging your head against the wall because you didn't take the time to do the updates. Then file and print sharing has to be turned on. If you don't have file and print sharing turned on, then nothing's going to work because this is the service that is required for file and print sharing. The firewall, you have to make sure your firewall is not blocking the file and print sharing. So this isn't just on the server computer where I said, you have the one dedicated computer. The firewall might be your firewall. So, if you have the secretary's computer trying to get to that dedicated computer, it might be the firewall on the secretary's computer that's causing the problems. So if you can't get to the shared file, disable the firewall, whether it's Windows firewall, Norton firewall, McAfee firewall, just disable it entirely. If you can then get to the file or folder, it's a firewall problem, and then you just go in and mess with the firewall configurations. If you still can't get to the file or folder, leave the firewall disabled, but realize it's not the firewall that's causing the problems, and then go on with your normal troubleshooting steps. And then finally, with Windows 7 and Windows Vista, there was something that came out, was called NDP. It was Network Discovery Protocol, or I guess the ability to turn it off. That wasn't there with XP or 2000 or NT or any of that. And basically, the Network Discovery Protocol is the actual protocol that allows your computer to be seen on the network and to see other computers on the network. If this is not running, or if this is blocked, or etc., you're just not going to be able to be part of a network. It's that simple. So this is the basic concept of what needs to happen to get your Windows workgroup working. So that's the class on Introduction to Windows Workgroups. There's not a lot to Windows Workgroups, but Workgroups can be very, 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 very useful. And they're a cost-effective solution that are many times all a company or an organization needs. We talked about the basic concept of what a workgroup is. It is just a group of computers on the local area network. It allows you to logically define computers into different groups. Workgroup 1, workgroup 2, or you could say accounting, sales, marketing. If you didn't want to do a full domain, this is a way to group computers together on the network. Again, all the security in a workgroup is in the individual computers. So if you need to change a whole set of security policies, that means you have to sit down at each and every single computer on that workgroup and change the security policies for those computers. Again, we'll go into a class on domains, but if you have a domain and a domain controller, you can change the security policies for the entire network at one single computer. In a work group, you have to change the policies at every single computer in the work group. We talked about why you might think of using a work group. Again, if all your company or organization needs to do is share a few files and folders, maybe they have some little web application or web database, something like that, this is very cost effective. Again, you just go to Best Buy, you pick up some little crappy E-machines or Dell computer with a 500 gig hard drive, you set it up on the network, you set up a work group, and you're done. You're now sharing files, you're sharing folders, you're sharing printers. It's that easy, it's that inexpensive. If you want backup software, you pay $50 for a copy of a good piece of backup software for a normal workstation computer, because that's all you're buying. Whereas if you have a full-blown server, if you go out and buy Windows 2008 Server Edition, the backup software for that alone is $600. So if all you're doing is sharing files or have a little website, why buy something that is going to cost you $600 just for backup software for? Just buy the little workstation computer, and everybody's going to be happy. As we talked about before, the business lesson with this in the real world is, if your boss or your client comes to you and they say they're willing to spend $5,000 or $3,000 or whatever on a file server, and you can provide them a solution this work group with this little dedicated computer for $800 or $1,000, A, they're going to be happy and they're going to like you, and B, when they come to you in the future with an absurd proposal where they're trying to lowball the price, you will have a much better position to tell them that they need to spend more money. You know, if they come to you and they say they want to spend $5,000 one time and they only spend $1,000, well, when they come back to you and they say there's another project that they're willing to spend $5,000 on, they will be much more receptive if you say that project is going to cost them $10,000. So that's the give and take in the real business world. Again, you know, the best way to set up one of these work groups, I think, is to have that dedicated computer. So it's like the faux server. So it's a server that's not a server, I guess. But basically just a workstation computer, Windows 7 Business Edition, XP Professional, Vista Business Edition. Just one computer with a nice sized hard drive. You share out the files and folders from there. Again, you only have one computer to deal with for security settings. You only have one system to mess with. You know, if something's going wrong on the network, it's just nice and neat. It keeps it all in one space. If you allow everybody on the network to share their files and folders, you can just get a logical mess. And remember, in the business world, in the real computer world, logical is as much a problem as the physical. You know, everybody thinks our problems are all about hard drives dying and switch configurations and router configurations. A lot of our problem, a lot of the work orders we get are about, where are my files? Well, I don't know. Where did you put your files? I don't know. I mean, you don't realize how many clients realize. I mean, they'll just save files willy-nilly all over the place, and they don't even remember where they saved them. So when you have that boss or that secretary, you know, they need their accounting file now. I mean, you can get into the whole argument about they should know where they put their own accounting file, but it's not going to lead anywhere good. So basically, if you create one dedicated computer with all the files and folders shared on that single dedicated computer, it keeps it all in one place, and again, will just make everybody happier. As I said, I was going to do a demonstration on how to create a work group. I was going to, you know, create a couple of virtual computers and do all the stuff to create a work group. And then I saw what they did with Windows 7 and Vista, and I realized it would take about 3 hours just to show you all the possible configurations and problems. So instead of doing that, I'm going to trust that you are becoming, or you are, computer professionals, and so you can figure out how to create a work group. It's not complicated, it's not difficult. There's just a whole bunch of little settings, and there's a whole bunch of little things that can go wrong. So if I had to run through all of those little things, again, it would take 3 hours. For you, just do a Google search, see what they say about it, and play with it yourself. Again, since Windows XP, so Windows XP, Vista, and Windows 7, they have come up with, it used to be called Network Setup Wizard, I don't know what it's called now, but they have come up with these configuration wizards to do everything for you. So it'll open those firewall ports, it will turn on Network Discovery Protocol, it will turn on file and print sharing. Again, just do your Google search and you'll be able to see, you know, what you need to do. The core of what is happening, so what happens in those setup procedures, those setup wizards, is first you put your computer into the work group that you decided to put it into, so office or home or accounting or marketing. Come up with a single name, and that's the name that you're going to put your computers into. So it says what work group, you say marketing or sales. After that, it then turns on something called file and print sharing. So file and print sharing is the actual service on a Windows computer that allows file and print sharing to happen. If that is not turned on, you simply can't do file and print sharing. It's, you know, that easy. The next thing is the ports on your firewall, on your computer. We're not talking about the router, we're talking about your computer, have to be open to allow file and print sharing. Most of the time, Windows Firewall works pretty well and doesn't block anything. Sometimes Windows Firewall does. If you're dealing with Norton Internet Security Suite or McAfee Internet Security Suite or any of those other massive security suites, those many times can cause problems with file and print sharing because they've blocked the firewall ports to allow file and print sharing to happen. So if you run through this wizard and you're still unable to share files, then turn off, disable the firewall entirely. Again, If you can now get to the files and folders, you know that the firewall was causing the problem, so you can go in and you can tweak the configuration within the firewall. If you still can't get to the files and folders, again, leave the firewall disabled because it may cause a problem in the future until you figured out what's going on, and then start your troubleshooting routine. Once you can get to the files and folders, then turn the firewall back on and see if you can still get to the files and folders. If you can still get the files and folders, you're fine. If it now blocks your files and folders, that's when you go in and you change the configuration to allow you to get to the files and folders. The last part of this whole file sharing network workgroup monstrosity is what was called NDP, Network Discovery Protocol. This came along with Windows Vista and is now in Windows 7. This is the actual networking protocol that allows computers to see each other on the network. So if your computer's network discovery protocol is not turned on, computers will not be able to see it, and it will not be able to see computers. So yeah, so if network discovery protocol isn't on, then none of, it's just not going to work. And that's really all it is to workgroups. You share out the files and folders that you want to share out, and you go on your day. We are going to have a class on file and folder permissions. So if you don't understand file and folder permissions, that is going to be one of the classes that's coming up relatively shortly. So that is like the final part of this whole setting up a workgroup, is you do have to change the permissions to allow people to get into the different files and folders. But again, that's kind of a class unto itself. So this was introduction to Windows Workgroups. Again, it's very, very useful, very cost effective, and if you use it right, you can make your clients and yourself pretty happy, especially with small networks. Again, this is intro series to this whole server track, so if you don't feel like you've learned enough, it's probably because you haven't. Just wait around a little bit and we'll get a couple more classes out to hopefully start solidifying all of this. As you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy. I hope you've understood what I've told you today, and I look forward to seeing you at the next class.